The old house had been empty for years. When Claire signed the lease, the landlord seemed almost relieved to hand her the keys. He avoided her eyes, mumbling something about a few repairs needed and strange noises from the pipes, but Claire wasn't bothered. The rent was dirt cheap, and the house had character. Tall ceilings, creaking wooden floors, and wallpaper that peeled like dried skin. To her, it wasn't creepy. It was potential. Her friends teased her about it. "You're basically moving into a haunted house," Mark joked as he helped carry boxes through the crooked front door. Claire rolled her eyes, though she couldn't deny the place had an odd atmosphere. It always felt colder inside than it did outside, even in the afternoon sun. The first night passed uneventfully, until the hour before dawn. Claire awoke to a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging against wood. It came from inside the walls. At first, she thought it might be rats, but the sound was too deliberate, too steady. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. When she pressed her ear to the wall, she froze. It wasn't scratching. It was whispering. The voice was faint, muffled by plaster and wood, but it was unmistakably human. A hiss, drawn out, syllables she couldn't understand. Her chest tightened as she leaned closer, straining to hear. And then the whisper formed words. "We see you." Claire stumbled back, heart hammering. The house fell silent again, the shadows stretching long across the floorboards as dawn's light crept through the blinds. She told herself it was a dream, that she had imagined it. But when she checked the wall later that morning, her fingers brushed across something carved into the peeling wallpaper, something she knew hadn't been there the night before. Letters, jagged and shallow, scratched into the wood. "Welcome home." That night, Claire kept every light in the house burning. The living room lamp glowed, the hallway light hummed, even the bulb above the staircase buzzed faintly with electricity. She told herself it was ridiculous, childish, but the thought of sleeping in darkness filled her with the dread she couldn't shake. Around midnight, she sat curled on the couch, staring at the walls. Every creak of the house felt sharper, louder. The pipes groaned, the floorboards shifted. But underneath all of it, she swore she heard something else. A faint murmur, like someone breathing just behind the plaster. She tried to distract herself with music, but when she turned up the volume on her phone, the whisper seemed to rise too, threading between the notes, growing clearer. "Don't leave us! Don't leave us!" Her throat tightened. She dropped the phone. The whispers stopped. Claire forced herself to check the walls again. Her hand trembled as she peeled back another section of wallpaper. Beneath the faded yellow flowers was wood, splintered and scarred with dozens of deep, uneven marks. At first she thought they were random scratches, but as her eyes adjusted, the shapes became letters. Names. Dozens of them. Each carved in desperation, uneven, overlapping, some so old the wood had warped around them. Her breath caught when she saw one name repeated over and over again, scratched deeper than the rest. Claire. The sound started again, whispering, directly behind the wall where her name was carved. This time the words were sharp, urgent. "She's here. She's here." Claire stumbled back, knocking over the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room as the bulb shattered. In that instant, the whispering erupted from every wall around her, voices overlapping, hundreds of them, hissing and murmuring her name in unison. "Claire! Claire! Claire!" Her scream filled the house, and the walls whispered back. The next morning, Claire couldn't bring herself to leave the house. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the walls as sunlight poured through the window, pretending daylight meant safety. But the carved names wouldn't leave her mind. The whispers, the way they had spoken her name in the dark, it was too specific, too real. By afternoon, determination pushed fear aside. She grabbed a hammer from a box of tools and returned to the living room. If there was something inside those walls, she was going to find it. Her first swing cracked the plaster. Dust clouded the air, coating her tongue in grit. She swung again and again until a hole gaped in the wall, revealing darkness beyond. She expected insulation, pipes, maybe rat nests. But instead, she saw empty space. A narrow gap ran behind the walls, a kind of hidden crawl space. With a flashlight clenched in her trembling hand, Claire pushed the opening wider and climbed inside. The air was colder, damp, thick with the smell of mildew and something sour, something like rot. Her light swept across wooden beams and old boards, scrawled with more carvings, words, phrases, drawings that looked like stick figures with hollow faces. And then she saw it. At the end of the crawl space was a small wooden door, no taller than her chest. Its surface was covered in handprints, small ones, dozens of them, pressed into the wood like the door had been touched again and again by children desperate to get out. Her stomach turned. She hesitated, hand shaking as she reached for the handle. It was cold, too cold, like metal pulled from deep water. The whispers returned, muffled but closer this time, as though they were right behind the door. Open it. Open it. The beam of her flashlight trembled across the door's edges. Her breath came fast, shallow. Something inside her screamed to leave it shut, to crawl back out, to never return. But the whispers pressed harder, louder, and the door began to rattle. The little wooden door shook violently, as if unseen hands were pounding from the other side. Dust rained down from the beams above, and Claire froze, her palm pressed against the cold handle. Then, without warning, the rattling stopped. Silence. Her ears rang from the sudden stillness. She waited, hardly daring to breathe. And then, slowly, with a groan like old wood bending, the door cracked open on its own. The air that seeped out was foul, carrying the stench of damp earth and decay. Her flashlight pierced the darkness inside, revealing a narrow passage that sloped downward. Stone walls lined with damp moss closed in tightly, as if the house itself was hiding something deep beneath it. Claire hesitated, but her curiosity pulled stronger than her fear. She crouched low and crawled through the opening. The passage grew colder with every step. Her breath came in visible puffs. The whispers followed, soft at first, then louder, overlapping, too many voices speaking at once. Don't go further. Stay with us. Turn back. The beam of her flashlight landed on something ahead, an open chamber carved into stone. She stepped inside and froze. The room was filled with objects, children's toys, rusted and broken, tiny shoes lined up against the wall, dolls with cracked faces, their glass eyes staring blankly in the dark. And in the center of the room stood a single chair. On it lay a bundle of yellowed papers held together by brittle string. Claire reached for them with shaking hands. They crumbled at her touch, but she could still make out the words scrawled in frantic handwriting. They live inside the walls. They whisper because they cannot scream. Do not listen to them. If you hear your name, it's already too late. Claire's throat tightened. Her name was everywhere, scratched into the toys, carved into the stones, etched into the chair itself. And then she heard it again. Her own voice, from the darkness behind her. Claire. She spun around, flashlight beam cutting across the chamber. The passage behind her was empty, but the whispers had changed. They weren't begging anymore. They were laughing. The laughter echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the stone walls, sharp and jagged like broken glass. Claire's pulse thundered in her ears as she backed toward the narrow passage. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The whispers answered in unison, a chorus of tones both high and low, men and women, children and elders. They spoke her name again and again, weaving it into a chant. "Claire, Claire, Claire, she belongs to us." The flashlight flickered. For an instant, the room went black. When the light sputtered back, the chair in the center was no longer empty. A figure sat there. It looked like a woman, her body thin and twisted, skin as pale as candle wax, stretched too tightly across her bones. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle, eyes wide, lips torn into a grin too wide for her face. "Welcome," the figure hissed. But it wasn't her voice. It was hundreds of voices at once, pouring from her mouth, vibrating the air. Claire stumbled back, the beam of light trembling as it cut across the toys, the shoes, the carvings. Everywhere she looked, the names scratched into the walls seemed to shimmer, shifting, twisting into a single repeated word. Claire. The figure rose from the chair, joints cracking like snapping wood. The whispers swelled until they were deafening. She bolted for the passage, crawling as fast as she could, but the walls seemed to close in, pressing against her shoulders, gripping at her arms. She could feel breath on the back of her neck, hot and damp, though no one was behind her. The voices followed. "Don't run. Stay inside the walls. It's safer here." Her flashlight went out. She clawed forward in the dark, her palms raw against stone. And just when she thought she'd reached the crawl space leading back into her living room, she slammed into another wall. Solid. The passage behind her had changed. And she realized with dawning horror that the house wasn't just old, it was alive, and it wanted her inside. Claire pounded her fists against the stone, screaming until her throat burned. The narrow passage pressed tighter, the air thick and damp like the inside of a coffin. The whispers surrounded her, louder now, overlapping, filling every inch of her skull. "You are home. Stay. Forever." She clawed at the stone, nails tearing, skin splitting. Her flashlight rolled uselessly at her side, its dim beam catching glimpses of movement in the walls. Hands. Pale, skeletal hands pressing through cracks in the stone, reaching for her. One brushed her cheek, another tangled in her hair. She screamed and thrashed, but the grip was too strong. The wall in front of her shifted, softening like wet clay. Her hands sank into it. She tried to pull back, but it clung to her skin, dragging her forward. She realized with horror that the walls weren't just holding her, they were swallowing her. Her body sank into the stone as if it were liquid. Cold seeped into her chest, her lungs, her bones. She gasped, choking, but the whispers poured into her mouth, filling her with their voices. "One of us. One of us. One of us." The last thing she saw before the stone closed over her face was the figure from the chamber crawling toward her, grinning wide, her glassy eyes glowing faint in the dark. And then, silence. The living room stood quiet. The crawl space wall looked untouched, the plaster smooth, as though it had never been broken. The landlord returned weeks later, showing the house to another potential tenant. He smiled nervously, fumbled with the keys, muttered about strange noises in the pipes. And inside the walls, faint but constant, the whispers waited. This time, when the new tenant laid her head down to sleep, the voices would be ready.
They already knew her name.